who expect us to put right this historic wrong.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
The thousands of people at Central Hall thanked Sir Brian Langstaff. He thanked them. We should acknowledge, as has already been said, the Right Honourable Lady for Hull North and her leadership of the all-party group. Can I say to my Right Honourable friend that permanent secretaries and cabinet secretaries need to say to everyone throughout their chain, are we doing something which is right? Are we doing something which is necessary? Are we doing something which will work? If those questions had been asked more effectively, would my Right Honourable friend agree that the number of tragedies would not have been 5 for every MP in this House, not 5 times more for everyone who's injured or affected, but the numbers would have been greatly reduced and we'd have learnt the truth earlier.
Well, can I start, Mr. Speaker, by thanking my Right Honourable friend for his dedicated work co-chairing alongside the member for Kingston upon Hull North, the all-party parliamentary group on haemophilia and contaminated blood. And I can assure him that Sir Brian's report is highly detailed and sets out a number of recommendations, and I can assure my Right Honourable friend that we will respond to it in full as quickly as possible.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to begin by stating something which I think we all now agree is self-evidently the case, that this scandal represents the very worst of Westminster. Decades of deflection, decades of denial, and of course decades of deceit. Children used as research, parents watching their children die, children watching their parents die. Tens of thousands of people impacted, many of whom, of course, are not here to see this day. And for those who imposed this tragedy upon them, no consequences have yet been felt. But today is not about them. Today is about the victims. And to them, on behalf of myself and my colleagues in the Scottish National Party on these benches, I wish to offer you 3 things. First is an apology. I'm incredibly sorry that this happened to you. Second is to say quite openly, thank you. Thank you for your determination and your desire, for being able to pry open the doors of this place and ensure that your voices were heard by all of us. We would not be here today without your efforts. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, it's to say to the victims that I can assure you, we will do everything that we can to ensure that the government implements the recommendations as laid out today. Now, I've heard the Prime Minister make a very sincere promise in relation to compensation. And I would like to say to him that we will work with him and his government, and indeed any future government, to ensure that that promise is swiftly kept.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the absolute consensus that today is a moment for the families and the community and their voices to be heard loudest. Every single testimony and account set out in Sir Brian's report today sets out a unique story of hurt, suffering and loss. Individually, these accounts are astounding. Taken together, they are truly unimaginable. They must be heard and they must be understood, as the Honourable Gentleman said. And I thank him for his remarks, and I know that we share a determination to work together to ensure that nothing like this shocking and avoidable calamity can ever happen in our country again.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir Brian Langstaff's report today has finally uncovered the truth of this appalling tragedy which has affected the lives of so many. And so many have been fighting, as the Prime Minister said, and the Leader of the Opposition said, for decades to get to this point. Sir Brian has highlighted what is a devastating and abject failure of the British state. Medical professionals, civil servants, politicians, all of whom felt their job was to protect their own reputation, rather than to serve and look after the public who they were there to serve. As we rightly today remember all the victims of this terrible tragedy, will my right honourable friend commit himself unashamedly to working to ensure that all those in government, politicians and civil servants, recognise that their job is to serve the public and not to protect themselves?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for her statement as Prime Minister. She launched Sir Brian's inquiry and in doing so began the process of establishing the full truth we have heard today. There is no doubt, as she recognises, that the inquiry came too late, that compensation came too late, was woefully insufficient, and the consequences of that failure are stark. And that is why today I apologise on behalf of governments since the 1970s for that shameful failure. But I can also assure her that Sir Brian and his team have made a series of wide-ranging recommendations, and we will study every single one of them in detail and work urgently across government and public organisations, our health services and civil society, all to ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again, but also that we end the challenges that she encountered, where the institutions responsible for serving the public, including the NHS and civil service, are more concerned by cost than accountability.
Ed David.
Mr. Speaker, today is about the tens of thousands of people whose lives have been torn apart by this disaster. Many of them have fought and waited for decades to see this day, and tragically thousands have died waiting, as the Prime Minister reminded us. I pay tribute to the survivors, the families, the campaigners and the journalists who fought so long and so hard for justice. Having listened to their stories and now seen the evidence laid bare in this report, I want, on behalf of my party, to echo the Prime Minister's apology. We are all truly sorry for the pain people have suffered over decades under governments of all parties, and for the failures of politicians and the state to do the most fundamental job to keep people safe. We must now ensure full compensation is paid without any more delay, and we must also make sure that nothing like this can ever happen again. In his report, Sir Brian highlights how, and I quote, "The truth has been hidden for decades through a lack of openness, transparency and candour that has caused enormous damage." So will the Prime Minister join me in backing the survivors' call for a duty of candour on all public officials?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his remarks. Across this House, we share a determination to work together to ensure that nothing comparable to this shocking and avoidable tragedy can happen ever again in our country. Today is a day for the victims and their families to hear the full truth, unequivocally acknowledged by all, and to remember the many, many lost loved ones. So the Minister for the Cabinet Office will be making a full statement tomorrow, but we will study every one of Sir Brian's recommendations in detail and work urgently across all parts of civil society to ensure innocent victims are never again forced to fight for decades to be believed.
Such as Javid.
I welcome the statement by my right honourable friend and indeed the words of the Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, this scandal, the biggest in the history of the NHS, but also Mid Staffordshire, Ockenden, the Cash Review, all of these scandals are linked by public servants putting the reputation of themselves and the NHS above that of patient safety and care. And time again, ministers have stood at that dispatch box of the successive governments, including myself, promising that lessons will be learned. So can I ask my right honourable friend, why will it be any different this time?
Mr. Speaker, Sir Brian's report is categoric that this scandal represents a decades-long moral failure of the state, but in particular he highlights an appalling truth, that our National Health Service failed. It was known that blood and blood products given by medical professionals were contaminated. It is correct to acknowledge that medical practice has evolved, Every day, hundreds of thousands of our NHS staff do provide life-saving care to the British people, and we are incredibly grateful. But the report today sets out clear and wide-ranging recommendations that we must study closely, and we will work urgently with our health services to ensure that nothing like this will ever happen again.
Final person on this is Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and his apology on behalf of the nation? Can I also thank Sir Brian for his report today? Finally, the truth. It's a vindication of the nearly 50 years of campaign. And I want to pay tribute to all those infected and affected